A common question students often ask me is, how do you know what sort of testing you need to do for a given feature? Now, rather than giving you a blanket answer, I'm going to give you an example. Suppose you're testing a page that displays a set of products from a catalogue, and the requirement is to add a new column that indicates the available colours. You could approach this from several ways. You might do a UI level test that might mock out the service layer and only test the UI components and check that the color column is rendered correctly based on what it gets back from the UI. This could be a simple Playwright or Cypress test, for example. And in that case, you might simply have one or two layers really. The first layer would be where you describe your business need. The first layer is always where you describe your business need. Maybe a scenario title like should display available colors for the listed products. And then with some examples of different situations. When the product has several colors available, when the product only comes in one color, when a product doesn't have any choice of colors available. So you'd have those as separate scenarios or separate examples inside your test case. And this would be your UI level test. That would be quite comprehensive. But you might ask, what about the service layer? Well, in that case, you might have an integration or API level test to check that you are returning the correct objects with the correct fields. And you might consider that that's sufficient if you know that the color attribute is present, for example. But what about end-to-end testing? So you could have an end-to-end test for this type of scenario, but it does feel quite granular. So what you might ask yourself is, what is the underlying business need? Maybe the real business need is to promote products that have color options so that the customers are more likely to purchase. So in that case, you might add an end-to-end scenario where you might have something like a catalog manager who adds some new skirts to the catalog with 3 colors available. And then a customer comes along and sees the search results when they search for some addresses. This would exercise the new feature, but in the context of the business value that it's actually delivering. So what we're seeing is there are several layers that you can approach, several facets of testing that you can look at when you have a requirement. You might look at the UI level and test the UI in isolation. That might be sufficient. You might need to check your APIs, that they return the right data. You may look at those existing API tests and consider them sufficient, or you might have to write new ones. You may have an end-to-end scenario, but when your requirements are very granular, you probably want to make sure those end-to-end scenarios are really focused on interesting user journeys or use cases rather than more granular requirements. So hopefully that's helpful in to give a practical example of how we break down the different types of testing that we need to do when you come across a feature.